Welcome to the Alouettes Flightdeck, podcast dedicated to Montreal Alouettes football. I am Tim Capper. You can find me on Twitter at Repack. That's REPPACT.
And I'm Cliffy D. You can find me on Twitter at Cliffy D. And this episode of the Alouettes Flightdeck is presented by SportBuff, where right now, if you go to their website and use the promo code FlightDeck-10, you can save 10% off of your order. Head on over to sportbuffshop.com.
How's it going, bud?
I'm doing very well. A very happy birthday to you.
Thank you. I can imagine the many, many times that I've actually done a podcast on my birthday. It's seems to be a lot of my friends that always seem to have had birthdays. It was like a birthday week usually type of thing. You and I aren't at that point yet, so unless you're going to change your birth date, or I'm going to change mine.
Highly unlikely.
Yeah, highly unlikely. But yeah, thanks, bud. It was pretty cool. Hey, I will admit, and if anybody who was checking out social media saw this today, it's coolest thing when you get a phone call from our quarterback, Vernon Adams, to wish me a happy birthday and to also to, thank me for being a long time season ticket holder. That means a lot. Same thing with what Gino did a few weeks ago. I mean, it's even cooler to get two calls from these guys. I think that's really, really cool. So, thanks again for the wonderful memory, VA, and looking forward to seeing you, bud, over in Trois-Rivières in the next couple of weeks.
There you go. I mean, how awesome is that? I mean, just the fact that the Alouettes, like a lot of their players, are calling season ticket holders just to thank them for being a part of the team, so to speak, and to, let them know that they're appreciated. I think it's fantastic. It's a great initiative. I'm glad the team is doing it. I'm glad the players are volunteering their time to pick up the phone and just reach out to each and every one of Alouettes Nation. Mm-hmm. It's a tremendous thing, and I hope it's something that they keep on doing for years to come. Yeah,
I think the Alouettes are finally getting back, making a name for themselves in the community after, I would really say that their reputation really did take a hit. I mean, not just, COVID aside, but I think they start, it did kind of wane a little bit, how they were in the community, I'm sure, because, it's not necessarily that it was stale or anything like that, but it was, I don't know. To me, that's just my opinion. I don't know what you think about that, Cliff, though.
No, I mean, the past couple of years, let's not forget, have been challenging, to say the least, for everybody.
Yeah.
So to expect things to be the way that they were, it's just not going to happen. But the fact that the Alouettes kind of recognize that all it just takes sometimes is just something simple like reach out to your season ticket base and just say, hey, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for sticking with us despite everything that's been going on. And just to let you know that we got your back. You got our back, but we got your back too. I mean, that speaks volumes. And that's the kind of thing that, you tell a friend, you tell your coworkers, like, hey, guess who just called me on the phone? Like, what a great experience as far as I'm concerned. And this is one of those things that people catch on to, they realize. And I don't know if anyone's ever going to invest in season tickets just based on the fact that they might get a phone call from their favorite player. But you know what? I've seen people renew or subscribe to season tickets for weirder things than that. So, I mean, sometimes that's all it takes is just a little bit of engagement, and it goes such a long way. And once again, the Alouettes they're really onto something here by getting in touch with each and every one of their season ticket holders just to say thanks, just to, show appreciation for their support. I mean, it's one of those things that's just going to pay off in the long run.
I'm curious to know, and we really don't know this. I mean, any other fans of teams that are listening to the podcast now, does your team do this, or has your team done this in the past? I've not heard of anything. I mean, I would expect. Saskatchewan, something I would expect. Edmonton, not recently, but Edmonton, I would think that they would have done. Maybe need to ask Andrew or Super Mike about that one. Maybe they'll know, or Kayla. Maybe she'll know. BC, maybe. Reach out to Marcia, see if that's happened for them. But it's initiative. That's all that matters. And you'd think that the league may pick up on a little bit of this stuff, But it's early, I guess. I'll give them a mulligan for now.
There you go.
Yes, an Ambrosi mulligan. So, Just as a reminder, by the way, because we are really taping early this week for a particular reason. But just as a reminder that the Randy's Road Trip Montreal edition will be occurring next Tuesday, May 10th. It's going to be happening at the Big O. Potentially, we might be able to see, catch a look-see at the brand new helmets. We'll see. If not, I'm sure we'll catch them obviously we will catch them at camp. But yeah, if you haven't gotten your email already, or if you have to tell the team that you are going to be attending, make sure you do so. I don't know if there was a time limit on when they sent the reminder, the rescheduling out earlier. So I'd have to go back and check. But yeah, just as a reminder to all fans, it is going to be occurring. And I think it's the last of them, because with Randy having to reschedule, I could be wrong, because there's been no hype for this. I don't get this. Yeah,
it's almost been like an afterthought, which I don't know if that's by design or if it's just the circumstances of everything that's kind of gone around, as far as maybe dealing with CBA stuff, maybe dealing with the league in general.
Yeah.
It's so hard to say, really. And then, of course, he did actually test positive for COVID, which is the reason why Montreal's stop on the road trip didn't happen initially. So,
yeah.
It could be any number of things. But listen, at least it's an event trying to engage fans, trying to let people come and participate in a town hall meeting and just have your say if you want to. That's, as far as I'm concerned, it's a great thing. So if you got a chance to take advantage of it, and if you think you missed the boat, you may not have. Your best bet would be to contact the Alouettes and see if your invitation that you had gotten initially is still good.
Yeah,
and get on board if you can.
Hey, for sure. And we're talking about training camp too. I think the only other news, really league news that we've heard recently, is that the CFLPA did their normal, I don't want to call it due diligence, but they follow their script, and they're asking their members / players for a mandate to strike. It's been put out by the 3 Down Nation. It's just a formality. They have to do it. It makes sense, because it will put more pressure on the league, depending on where they're currently at in their negotiations. So I'm not scared about it, because as I said, it seems to be what they normally do when they get to this point.
We've been down this road so many times, and it's part of the process. So, that's why I'm not even giving it a second thought, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
It's just, listen, the time to worry is, the eve of training camp, if there's no CBA deal, and then all of a sudden players report, but then they're not going to participate because they were told to.
And it happened, last time that occurred was 2019, right? Didn't we have
I believe.
Yeah, slight delay in 2019.
We had a very slight delay.
Yeah.
But so I'm hoping for the best, as always, but preparing for the worst. And honestly, I think this is really just part of the process. It's part of the, what the necessary steps that have to be taken. So let's hope that's all it is. And it's just a matter of I don't know about if it's necessarily about putting pressure on, because you're less than 2 weeks from camp starting. So I think if this was like a pressure tactic, fine. I guess pressure's on now, but I guess we'll see just how serious it's taken. So
yeah, I thought the results, because it was announced over the weekend that they were doing this, and I didn't know if the results were going to be counted. Did you read the story? I think it was either they're going to be announced either tomorrow or Wednesday. I think it was
possibly Wednesday. I guess with the draft going on, the league's obviously going to be very busy tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. So
maybe it's. Once the draft is over, then you don't have that distraction to worry about anymore. So
yeah, true. And to the reason that we are early this week is specifically because of what is happening tomorrow. And what is that, Cliff?
That would be not only the CFL National Draft, but also the CFL Global Draft. It is officially 100% draft day tomorrow.
Does that mean I also have to watch the movie with Kevin Costner?
You can if you want to.
I've never seen it, actually.
No?
No.
Me neither.
Okay, there we go.
I know it's to do with the Cleveland Browns, and I don't give a rat's ass about the Cleveland Browns. I'm sure you don't either.
No, especially because they're in my team's division.
Exactly.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, this is the time of year. Obviously, many CFL fans love. Cliff adores. I'm sort of meh, but I go along with it because it is part of it is part of what's happening in the CFL. I still got to keep up to date somehow, But we had JC Abbott on with us this week. We'll bringing him in a couple of minutes and talk about the CFL draft. He's from 3 Down Nation, and a lot of great insight, I will admit, I'm expecting from him on what the league's up to, and obviously, more importantly, what the Alouettes are looking to do tomorrow.
No, I'm expecting him to come in with some great perspective and just sharing his thoughts. I mean, like, you see the mock drafts, you see a lot of the talking heads, so chiming in, offering their thoughts of what's going to happen tomorrow, and just to cut through all the nonsense. I mean, that's what JC does more than anything else. Is he gets right down to the meat and bones of everything, and he just presents the facts, and he just tells it like it is. And that's what I appreciate about his writing, and I know he's going to bring it exactly just like that here on the flight deck this evening. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, you know what? Just looking at what we have here in front of us, don't other seem to be anything else that we need to talk about that's Alouettes related, because it's been very tough. As we know, at the beginning of the new broadcast season, sometimes there isn't a lot to talk about. Next week, obviously, there's going to be tons to talk about with Randy's road trip and the Owls picks and yeah, some interesting stuff. Just some interesting stuff that I'm sure that we're going to hear about. And who has the best coverage? Who is the best coverage? So, anyways, you know what? I think without further ado, Cliff, that being said, I think we're going to go ahead and bring JC in and to talk about the draft. And when we get back, we'll see if there's a little bit more to talk about. And to talk with this episode about the upcoming CFL draft, we have JC Abbott from 3 Down Nation. Hey, JC, thanks for joining us.
How you doing, guys?
Doing good. Looking forward to see what's going to be happening in the CFL draft coming up this Tuesday. And actually, not only the CFL draft, we got the global draft too. But, for the Alouettes, it is a very, very interesting draft, considering this is the first time. We might as well get the elephant out, get the elephant out of the room. For the first time since 2018 that the Alouettes are going to be having a first-round draft pick. We finally get rid of that whole Johnny Man. We should call this something, Cliff. Johnny Manziel curse, the Johnny Manziel, whatever you want to call it. I mean, the last time we had a first-round draft pick was 2018 with Trey Rutherford. Pomp and circumstance. Cliff and I remember seeing him at the Alouettes meet and greet that they had that year, and he's out of football. So, JC, something that the Alouettes haven't done since 2018. How important is it for the Owls to have this first-round draft pick?
It's super important, and I think they've done fairly well with where they've drafted over the last couple of years. You'd see some young Canadians that have risen in the ranks, like a Keon Julian Grant coming into his own, a Marc-Antoine Dequoy, guys like that. I've been impressed with their performance, but there is sort of a lack of big name stars, as it were, among the Canadians. They're very solid across the board, but other than Chris Aki, there's not necessarily a marquee name, even along the offensive line. And so this first round pick will give them a chance to hopefully take a guy that can contribute early and stick around for a long time and potentially, become that marquee name down the line.
It would be nice. I mean, as I said, and I think that the draft, though, and as we've heard over the past couple of years, JC, is that everybody understands it is the Canadian draft. That's what people need to remember too, and that even last year, I think it was that Danny Mack even said, we're drafting for the future. Now, when you hear a GM say that about the Canadian draft, is it something that you agree with, in the long run, or do you feel that sometimes the CFL teams needs to draft for that current season?
It's a bit of a double-edged sword. I think it's true to an extent because for most Canadians, even the top-end ones, it's going to take you a good 3 years before they really come into their own as a pro. And that's just the nature of a lot of them coming from youth sports. Not as much high-level coaching, not as much high-level training. When you're in youth sports, it's not the same as the NCAA. Football's not your entire life. You'll have guys, missing pregame walkthroughs to go take tests and things like that. Mm-hmm. So it is a big jump in competition, and guys need that development. So you want to have an eye to the future with the draft. You don't want to have to be in a position where you're drafting for right now. At the same time, if that's your entire strategy, I think you do miss out, because there are a few guys every year who are going to contribute right away, usually on special teams, but there are starters to be found in every draft. And if you're not attacking this draft with the idea that I want guys who can help me right now, if you stand pat, especially these teams that think I don't really have any needs, sometimes you'll turn around and through injuries or, 2 years down the line, a guy leaves because he gets a bigger contract somewhere else, or somebody surprise retires. You find yourself in a situation where you're missing that Canadian talent because you've drafted guys who are going to take some time to develop versus ones who can help you right now. And the extreme example of this that always comes to my mind is the Ottawa Redblacks. And I knew the Redblacks were about to go downhill after, I think it was the 2019 draft. Marcel Desjardins drafted, I think with his last 3 or 4 picks. Each one of them was spent on a guy who was sort of not seen as a major prospect, sort of a surprise. And he said specifically, I drafted each of these guys because they had eligibility remaining. I want to send them back to school because we don't need an upgrade in Canadian talent right now. And for me, that was a huge red flag. I'm like, oh, that's going to come back to bite them. And sure enough, very quickly, they went from a very strong Canadian core to a very weak one. It resulted in 2 losing seasons. And then, of course, Desjardins is out the door. So you have this double-edged sword where you do have to be aware of the future element here. Like if you're drafting all for the future, you're going to screw yourself over.
Yeah. And also, I had to correct myself too. I mean, the Owls did draft for somebody who started last year, and David Cote, and he was a great pickup for the Alouettes, last year in the 5th round. So, I mean, everybody, as you said, but he is special teams, as you said, JC, but still, somebody who was able to start. Lastly, before I let Cliff talk here, what's your thought on because you've seen the lists, the rankings for all the eligible Canadians, and obviously the huge question too is, if a lot of these guys have potential NFL careers, why do you think that some of these teams may take a shot at these guys, even though it may be like 3, maybe 4, if they decide to do that years down the line to come to the CFL? Why make those Why make those picks?
Drafting at the end of the day is just a gamble. So for every player, right, nobody is very good at evaluating football players. Even the best evaluator in the world, the best evaluator in the NFL, if you're really good, you're going to miss 50% of the time. That's just the nature of it, right?
Yeah.
It's unpredictable. You can't project guys. So if you're making a gamble on every single player, at a certain point in a draft, you may see a guy in front of you where you think the gamble is so bad on that guy becoming a player that it's actually a safer bet to take a gamble on a better player on the likelihood that he'll come north. So you're playing the odds in that sense of, is this potential 4th round, 5th round pick that I see that can come in right now, is what he can potentially give me as good as the 50% chance of what this guy who may have an NFL opportunity can potentially give me in the 50% likelihood he comes to my team. I think sometimes teams make the wrong call on that. They jump on those NFL guys a little bit too early for my liking, when there's still good, competent youth sports players on the board, guys that come in and eventually develop into players. But at the end of the day, there is a place in the draft to make those long-term gambles. Now, it's not going to have a major effect on this draft just because of the unique situation that we're in right now. There's only 2 guys in this draft class that have actual NFL contracts or were drafted. That's John Mechie and Jesse Luketa. 3 other guys have minicamp invites, but those pretty rarely turn into contracts. So you're in a safe situation betting that those guys will be in camp. In past years, we've seen far more guys with NFL contracts. Just the way the cards fell this year, it's not going to have a huge impact. But I could see this dynamic playing out with Jesse Luketa because he fell to the 7th round in the NFL draft. So somebody's going to take him earlier than we might have thought in this draft because he fell so far.
Makes sense. Yeah. Cliffy.
All right. Well, JC, I've identified for the Alouettes as far as needs go when they when their turn is called to make a draft pick. I think they really need to rebuild the defense because I think the defense as a whole has definitely taken a shot as far as free agency goes. Like they've lost a lot of good players, and ideally you'd want to rebuild there. I'm also taking a look at the offensive line and saying, well, you can never have too many good Canadian offensive tackles or offensive linemen for that matter. Where have you identified some of the Alouettes' needs if they're different from what I've suggested?
I think you're spot on with your assessment there. To me, I think they need to add some depth at defensive back. That's really a spot where I see them desperate to get a player. Marc-Antoine Dequoise is projected as the starter at safety, but behind him they've got Jermaine Gabriel, who's a little bit long in the tooth at this point, and then it's just Kerfalo Exume, who is mostly just a special teams player and not really a safety. So you need some guys in that defensive backfield that can at least compete in camp and potentially push Dequoise. You might need some guys on the defensive line as well, with David Menard leaving. And then the offensive line depth, I think, is the other area that you really need to address. They were solid across the board with their starting 4 Canadians on the offensive line last season. None of those guys are really sort of big name draft picks or stars, if you will. But they were solid as a group, right? The sum of their parts was better than any one individual. But if you look at the guys behind them, I'm not sure they have another guy who can step into the role at the same level. You've got Kobena Asare, who's bounced around a lot as a practice roster guy. Patrick Davis, I think they're higher on him than I am. He came out of Syracuse, but barely played in college. Then you've got the big man Samuel Thomasin from Laval, who has some movement issues in my regard just because of his size. And then David Brown is the best of the bunch, who's a guy who couldn't stick in Calgary, has upside, but struggled with injuries. So I think you need to find a guy on the offensive line, maybe in the 2nd round, that you can stick in there to have some comfort at that position. The one other place I would look is at the receiving core. You're going to probably start 2 there, or you might start 2 there with Keanu Julian Grant and Hergy Mayala. You have the potential to start 2, not that they need to. But then beyond that, they have a couple of drafted free agents and Rashawn Simonize on their roster. So I'd like to add a receiver at some point in the draft just to flesh out the depth there as well.
All right. To me, I think without question, I think barring something crazy, it will end up being Enoch Mcconzo from Coastal Carolina that gets drafted in the 1st round by the Alouettes. I mean, it checks off all the boxes as far as I'm concerned. Outstanding defensive player for the Chanticleers, Quebec-born guy. So that right away is right in Danny Mac's wheelhouse. Is there a potential scenario, though, where they don't go with Mcconzo and they maybe think about going after someone, even if they're not a Quebec-born player?
I could see that scenario. Now, I agree with you. Enoch Mcconzo is the guy who makes the most sense. And I think he's probably the right value there at 4. I think on the 3-down board, we have him 5th ranked. So that's right in that spot, right in that range. For me, what you might find in the situation with Enoch Mcconzo is you may question where you're going to play him. So when he was at Coastal Carolina, he played what they call the spur linebacker role. So he was actually down in the box, sort of like a strong safety, but he covered the slot as well. So very versatile, rushed a lot off the edge, was fantastic in run defense, but didn't play up high a whole ton like he might if you think he's a safety behind Marc-Antoine Decour or someone who can challenge for that role. I actually think he could play Sam linebacker in the CFL. I'm not sure how many other people agree with me on that, but I think his skill set would lend itself well to that position. The question is, he's a little bit thin. He hasn't run a 40 for any team, so you're not sure really how rangy he is at top. And the one problem he really did have at Coastal Carolina, he had some missed tackle issues, particularly in space, because he plays super aggressive, but he doesn't really come to gather before the tackle. He just sort of shoots the gap or shoots into space. It's super disruptive as a force player against the run. But if you stick him up high at safety, do you worry about him making missed tackles with all that open field in the CFL? So if you're Danny Mack and you did recruit him and you feel like some of those issues have validity, maybe that's not the place where you go. However, I think it's a good fit for the Alouettes, what they need in terms of the defensive backfield. And they drafted his brother last year, Heath, who was a safety for Danny Mack with the Montreal Carabins. So the connections for me make it too of a fit to think they'll go anywhere else.
Okay. Now, what about offensive line? I think the automatic question, or the automatic answer, I guess, to that question would be Cyril Hogan-Sando from Laval, because, again, it once again checks off all the boxes. But I'm personally a little concerned because historically, Laval's offensive linemen just don't seem to last very long in the Canadian Football League. Is there a pick that Danny Mcconzo can make that would still work, but may not necessarily be one of those Quebec-born players?
I think so. Personally, I don't think Hogan-Sando is going to be there when they get their next pick in the second round. He has a potential to go late in the first or early in the second. He'll be probably off the board if the Alouettes do go Mcconzo in the first. So you're going to have to look elsewhere. And I think some of these guys could potentially fall into their lap. But someone like a Zach Fry might be someone who falls in this draft process because of some question marks regarding his strength and his commitment to the weight room. He might be a guy that you can pick up a little bit later in the draft who's got sort of high-end athleticism, high-end size, was a very good player at Western. And if you think you can shape him in your strength and conditioning coach can really get on him, maybe that's a player that you can add to your offensive line. Another guy is Braden Knoll from Wilfrid Laurier, could be a depth pickup a little bit later in the draft. Very versatile guy, playing up and down the line. And then I think the last one, another Quebec guy, and he's going to be the wild card of this draft. But we've seen the Alouettes before take some very large individuals. I mentioned Samuel Thomasin, just a very large dude. And there's a kid by the name of Marc-David Bien-Aimé who hasn't played since 2019, guys. He only played one game at Fresno State, and then because of COVID and other reasons, chose to come back to Montreal. He's actually been working at a local women's shelter. He is 6'5" and 365 pounds.
Whoa.
He was recruited to play tackle by Jeff Tedford, and he's entered in this draft. He wants to make a comeback into the CFL. Now, there is not tape on Marc-David Bien-Aimé. You cannot find that. He has not played since he was in high school. So for me, it's a big gamble. It's not something I would necessarily do. But we've talked about how Danny Mack has these relationships with guys through the recruiting process. He'll be very familiar with that player, far more than anyone else in the league. And I wonder if that's someone who later in the draft, maybe the Alouettes target or feel strongly about and pick him up as some offensive line depth.
You kind of answered my next question, because I was going to say, is there a draft pick out there that would be like one of those WTF kind of guys? And I have to agree with you, because that's someone who I thought about too, because again, those measurables are very hard to ignore. But at the same time, as you said, there's little to no film on the guy. So we just, it's very much a shot in the dark, if you will.
Yeah, and those things have happened in the CFL draft before, where you get guys who are either retired or have been out of the game for a few years that come in and typically go, higher than you might expect. Some of the names that come to mind, and they haven't all been good draft picks, but there's a woman from Western, now I'm blanking on his name, a few years ago, who was retired. And no one thought he was playing. And then Chris Jones drafted in the 4th round. And now that wasn't a success. But a few years later, there's a kid out of the University of Hawaii, Tui Eli, who had retired. But Danny McManus in Winnipeg had a good personal relationship with him, found out he wanted to come back, and actually drafted him in the 4th round as well. And he became a very, very solid backup for the Bombers, and I think would probably be in the mix to start this year, if it weren't for the fact that I think there's some vaccination issues on that front with him, and he has not re-signed. But these players do come around that are, no one has any idea about them. They haven't played in a couple of years, but because they have certain traits that teams value highly, particularly size and the ability to move with that size, sneak into places in the draft where you wouldn't expect them to go.
All right, let's switch gears for a second here and talk about the global draft, which is also happening this Tuesday. Montreal's got the first pick in the global draft. Do you see them possibly trying to address some of their needs with some of the players that are available there?
It's going to be an interesting situation with the global draft. I really don't know where it's all going to shake out. I don't think they need a punter, because Joseph Zima was pretty good last year. So that throws it all off, because all you do is take punters in the global draft, right? But there could be a couple good players available. Quite frankly, this year, guys, there's been some complaint that the quality of the global draft has not taken a step forward like it did last year, but rather a step back. It's not as good a player pool as it was last year. But there is a name to me that sparks a lot of interest. It would be an interesting player for the Alouettes to consider at number 1, and that's Jordan Genmark Heath, who's a Swedish linebacker who played first at Notre Dame and then transferred to UCLA, was a full-time starter for UCLA last year. And a lot of people thought he was going to sign as an undrafted free agent in the NFL, and he hasn't yet. He is not under contract with anyone, which has surprised me. So you've got the global draft coming up here in 2 days. If his situation doesn't change, this is a guy that might be near the top of many teams' draft boards because of the athleticism that he brings to the table at the linebacker position at 6'1", 228 pounds.
This is funny because I remember watching the combine and seeing Edris Jean-Alphonse and who else was there? Bailey Devine Scott, and I thought those would be excellent fits for the Alouettes. And again, with Edris, obviously being a Laval guy, once again, we're going back to the same narrative again about Danny Machocha going after all the local guys, so to speak, even though this is technically a global draft. But I don't know. I think the global draft, it should be interesting because, again, with Montreal having the first pick, it'll be interesting to see which direction they go, because it almost feels like a gimme, so to speak, like just sort of like a free space on the bingo card, because nobody's really expecting anything. I think like your average Alouettes fan, I don't think is even aware of this, let alone cares about which player, like which international player they go after. So you can almost take a real shot in the dark and see if something shakes out.
You can. I think you want someone who can, at the very least, contribute on special teams early. To me, that's the big requirement. Jean-Alphonse is fantastically fast, just so quick. But he didn't play a lot at the U Sports level, and you question how that might translate. It really warms my heart that you bring up Devine Scott, because he's a guy actually who's in the global draft, partly because I was able to do some scouting on him. I'm affiliated with a company called All 22 Global Scouting, who works with international players, and we selected Devine Scott as a player out of Division III Western New England, and we got him sent to the Tropical Bowl this year in Orlando, Florida. So some teams could see him there. Just a fantastic kid, super smart, a really talented engineering student, and a guy I think can contribute on special teams in that vein. Was immensely productive at the Division III level. So I really do like the names you brought up. But for me, at that top pick, you want to take high-end traits, and you want sort of a bigger body that can contribute on special teams. And so I'm not sure if in the defensive backfield, that's where they'll go with that pick.
That's fair. As I said, it's one of those situations that's kind of still, I'd say, new ground, especially for the Alouettes, because I don't like I believe the first global draft they picked, I think it was third overall, and then last year I think they took seventh overall. So I mean, like, to be able to have their first pick of anything is, I definitely think, uncharted territory for the Alouettes. Definitely.
There is another name with a French connection that I'll bring up. Another guy who wasn't at the CFL Combine, but I'm quite high on. Wael Nasri. He's a linebacker who played at Concordia for a season from France. And last year he was the top linebacker in the European League of Football, which is a new league that's cropped up there. He's got good size. I think he moves pretty well for the position. And he's got another Quebec connection, as do a lot of these French guys. So maybe there is a chance that they go with someone with those French connections up high in the draft.
Well, there you go. So I mean, this is where you find those diamonds in the rough potentially. So this is, like I said, this could end up being a real shocker for a lot of people, especially those who are expecting the national combine or the national draft to fill those spots. But then who knows? Maybe this global enterprise could be the new way to go about it.
I think that's probably a stretch as it stands right now, that it's going to be the new way to go about it. But I think with your first pick, there's a potential that you can add at least someone who can contribute early on special teams, and that's what you want. The depth really isn't there this year, but there will be some intriguing futures picks late in the draft, guys that will get NFL opportunities through the IPP program or have signed as undrafted free agents. There's a couple of guys in this class that you might have to wait on, but we'll hear some of those names called, I suspect, in that third round, even in that second round of the draft. People like Marcel Dabo, the German defensive back who played in that European League of Football and has an 11-foot broad jump and runs a 4.4 at 206 pounds. Just a freak athlete. Guys like that, I think, will get picked as futures guys. And that might be a place where there's value in the global draft. If they come north, those are tremendous. Effect has not happened yet with those guys because we're in the global history or process. But most teams have taken a futures flyer just on a global guy at some point. And we'll see, probably not this year, but maybe next year, some of those guys will start coming north and it'll pay off for teams.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me ask you a question quick about because we're talking about the global draft and how it has been over the past couple of years, and Randy Ambrosie's 2.0 and trying to get the CFL as much eyes on the CFL as possible. You know, I think there's been a little bit of talk that the global draft itself really has kind of lost its luster, or kind of lost its way, where, you know, the reasoning to get these, you know, these guys who played in Germany and stuff like that, not necessarily having the ties to the Alouettes or to any of the particular teams that purchased that draft them. Do you think that the draft has kind of lost its way and it's gone a different direction? And I mean, because as I said, it was originally set out there for a reason, but it seemed to has morphed into potentially, I guess, I mean, you still want to draft the best guys, but I mean, it seemed to be that it's especially maybe from Montreal, that we're drafting the best guys from in this global draft that may have Quebec ties rather than the best guy that may be available.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of issues with the global program that need to be addressed. And I think it took a step back this year in part because of the Montreal Alouettes, because they hired Greg Quick to coach their team. And so we lost the global director of scouting position that he was holding last year that helped sort of accumulate all this talent for last year's global draft. And they said they were going to hire someone new for that position. They were in the process for a long time, and they never did. So the people who are working on that have done, have put their nose to the grindstone. Lawrence Hopper, who's sort of the lower level scout, works very hard. I don't want to take away from any of the effort that those guys put in, but it would have been nice to have someone actually in charge of this process going into this year. And I think it suffered a little bit because of that uncertainty. The other thing is, I don't think people realize this. Like these European players, they're not stupid. They know what the value is here that they're getting. They know how tough it is to get on the field, and they know that as it currently stands, these global players make $11,000 less than the league minimum. They get a $54,000 Canadian contract, period, no change for 3 years. And as it stands now under the current CBA, you cannot sign for any more of that, even if you exceed your performance merits it. So Teodric Hansen, the star of the global program, is currently not under contract because if he were to sign right now, he would have to sign for $54,000, $11,000 less than the minimum salary for any other player, despite the fact that he's an impactful special teamer, one of the best in the league at what he does, and a contributor on defense. Now, is he worth, a tremendous amount of money in the big scheme of things, like a American starter or a Canadian starter? No, but he's worth more than less than the league minimum, and he knows it. That's not a lot of money to live on. And so hopefully that'll get squared away in this CBA, but there's a lot of players in Europe who realize that there is no upward mobility here in terms of their salary structure in the CFL. And where they're sitting now with things like the European League of Football, they can make, decent enough money playing football in Europe while being able to have other jobs. And it's a net benefit for them financially to not come to the CFL. So we've got stuck in this situation where some of the best players available are not coming to the league because the league decided to arbitrarily cap their salary.
Wow, that is brutal. I was wondering about Hansen too, because I thought he'd be someone that the Alouettes should have pursued in free agency. But yeah, if he's, I don't blame him. I wouldn't be paying. I wouldn't want to play for less than what I'm worth. That's
crazy. Yeah. How do you know, JC, how much they're making approximately in the European League?
It differs. Now, guys are not across the board making a lot of money per se, and the higher end guys will make more, but they're making a decent chunk of change. And I talked to one guy who was supposed to be in the global draft last year and then pulled out, who's a very high level player in Europe, a German guy who played at a high level U.S. school before he went back home to Europe, and was very successful there. And he said, look, like I can make added money here playing as one of the top players in the European League. They pay me, a decent amount every month. He didn't tell me exactly how much. And then I have a job on top of it that pays me, 70,000 euros. So why would I come to Canada to get paid 54,000 Canadian dollars? I'm losing money to do that. And these careers are very short. These guys do want to pursue this, but they need to have some promise that there's opportunity for them. In the case of a guy like Hansen, right, he wants to continue his career. He wants to sign. He's actively negotiating for it, but he can't re-sign for $54,000 because he can't live on that consistently. At that point, it's not worth it anymore. He's got to, move on with the rest of his life.
Mm-hmm.
That's wild.
It's unfortunate, and it was short-sighted by the league. I understand the incentive to want to cap these salaries low because teams pushed back against the idea of the global program in general. But if you want the global program to work, right, if you think this idea has any merit, then it needs the best players in order to work. And the best players are not going to come to the CFL for $54,000. And that's even just the best in Europe players. Forget about those top guys that are coming from the NCAA, right? Some of those guys will turn up their nose to it as well. So I think it was short-sighted to make it a hard cap.
Was there no, because you've totally blown my mind with this, 'cause I did not know about this. Is there not a loophole in a way where one of these global players can, because obviously a team will own a player's rights, but can't they release the guy and then re-sign him to a normal contract? Or there's something against that in the CBA itself? Or because you think there would be a way that players that start performing higher than what they're currently earning should be able to be paid what they're earned, even though they have a tag as a global player. Because right now, with all this stuff now, with the changing of what is considered a Canadian again, they're making these changes for these players that earn this title. What's the difference between these two types of players?
Unfortunately, the way it stands, if you want to make more than $54,000, you have to voluntarily renounce your global status. So you become an American, essentially. Which for these guys, I mean, maybe eventually there'll be a guy who can, break through that barrier and is good enough, who becomes a starter, where it wouldn't matter if he was counted as an American. But even for a guy like Hansen that's been super successful, the value add or the roster stability for an American with 13 special teams tackles, it's not huge, right? He'd be, taking a hard cut from his stability in terms of his spot on the team, in order to potentially make, $11,000 more, because I can't imagine he'd get much more than the minimum in that case. If he lost his global status. So it needs to be addressed in the CBA. Hopefully it is. At the same time, there's not a whole bunch of incentive from the Players Association standpoint to fight for big change on this front, because it is such a small portion of their player base, affects so few people. And it's, I don't think everyone is necessarily in favor of it. So these players are in a bit of a rough situation where I'm not sure how much people are actually advocating for them on that front.
Yeah, it really makes me wonder, guys, that if changes aren't made in the current CBA, which now I'm going to for sure check and see if they make some modifications, if this whole global thing will be dead if there are no changes, because CBAs last anywhere from 2 to 5 years depending on what league you're in. So it makes me wonder if the whole global thing will be dead if that's the case. Who knows?
Yeah, I think it's struggling at this point, to be entirely honest with you. Because of some of the situation around it, and because it's not a popular program among the football operations people, right? They don't like the fact that they have to scout these global players and add these global players, carry guys that maybe they don't think would make the roster otherwise.
Yeah.
No, I'm in favor of the program because I think it's good for growth overall of the sport. I think it behooves us as a league, if we care about the sport, to do things like this, just like we do with the Canadian ratio. But I also think that there's come a point fairly quickly here where people realize that some of the grand ideas associated with the global program in terms of how much revenue it might bring have been exaggerated, right? Their sport is growing popularity all over the world, but the NFL has a monopoly on that too. And I'm not sure how much actual revenue is out there. And right now, this program has only cost the league money. So I'm not sure even how long the supporters on the financial side will keep backing it if that's the case.
Yeah. Wow.
All right. Well, back to the draft itself. Do you, JC, see the Alouettes possibly making any trades? Because I know trades are one of those things that are kind of hit and miss when it comes to like actual draft day trades. It doesn't have quite the same impact as it does in the NFL. Do you see the Alouettes possibly trying to gain more gain draft picks for next year in exchange for letting a team move up or down, as the case may be?
Yeah, that's an interesting proposition there. trades don't happen very often in the Canadian draft, simply because there's not as much value in them. You're not snagging as many star guys that you need to jump in front of other people to grab. So they happen a little bit occasionally, usually before the draft, but very rarely. But in this situation, maybe there is value to that, because this is what I would say is a weak draft overall for a lot of external reasons. It's not particularly deep in terms of the talent. So guys where teams want to pick at the top of this draft, if you are hypothetically, say you're the Alouettes and you actually don't like the guys who will be available to you at the top of the draft, you don't think Enoch Mcconzo or the guys around him are going to have a major impact, and someone offers you a good package to move into that spot with picks for next year, which is going to be a stronger draft, maybe there's value in moving back like that to accumulate capital next year. Now, the problem with that is draft capital in the CFL is not worth as much as it is in the NFL, because the players are bigger gambles. They need time to develop. So I still doubt that it will happen. But anytime you can take more shots at good players and you can get more picks, it's better for you, because, like I said, it's a gamble. It's a 50-50 shot. And the more times you get that 50-50 shot, the more likely it is you get good players. So there's a strategy I could see there, but I still doubt it will happen just based on the history of the draft.
All right. And finally, everybody expects the Alouettes to draft all Quebec-born players or anyone with any sort of Francophone ties. Do you think there's just any possibility at all that Montreal, for whatever reason, decides not to do that? Or do you think it's just such a foregone conclusion that it's really just a formality at this point?
I think it's pretty much a foregone conclusion. Now, when I say that, I don't think they'll take a Francophone player with every single draft pick. That's not what they've done in the past even. But I do think, like Danny Machocha said this week, when you're sitting at that table on the clock and you've got two players very close, the Alouettes are always going to give the edge to the local guy. And they're honest about that. They'll admit that. So that's going to happen again. It always does. And there'll be guys that they rank quite closely, and they'll give the edge to the local guy. And as a result, they'll have probably more Quebec-born players out of this draft than guys who aren't Quebec-born. And there's some validity to that strategy. They've taken it to an extreme in the last 2 years, in my opinion. But there are advantages, like Danny Machocha talked about this week. And he does have extremely good insight into these players, having recruited them and been around them through the university ranks. So if they feel like they can get good value on a guy because Danny Machocha knows him very well, then more power to them.
All right. Well, it's going to be exciting no matter what on Tuesday, because, like I said, all the NFL or all the CFL teams, they're going to be making moves to better themselves, the Alouettes included. And I know, like I said, a lot of people, Tim included, can kind of take or leave the draft, but I think this is truly where you get to see where the work that your team does and the direction that they plan to be going in over the next couple of years. Absolutely.
It really matters, because this is the meat and potatoes of your roster, and you can set yourself up for the future and your long-term strategy. One thing that I think isn't being talked about enough with this draft is that there's a potential in the talks about the CBA that we'll get a pretty important rule change. Even if the ratio stays the same, there's a lot of people wanting it to go. So there's a minimum of 3 on defense and a minimum of 3 on offense in terms of starters. Well, a lot of teams aren't set up with their roster to make that happen. So if you're one of those teams and you know that's a possibility, in this draft, you go more heavily on defense. Do you think the value is there? Do you reach on guys to try and put yourself in a position where you're prepared if that change takes place? I think that's a really fascinating dynamic. And you see how teams are going to be strategizing in that regard through who they pick in this draft.
All right. Well said. JC, we can't thank you enough for joining us here on the Alouettes Flight Deck. Let everybody know where they can find you on social media.
You can find me on Twitter at the JC Abbott. That's capital TJC C and A. I don't really do the whole Instagram thing, so just follow me on Twitter.
All right. And of course, by all means, check them out over at 3 Down Nation. They do great work over there, especially when it comes to the draft stuff. I remember seeing your stuff when you were with the Ratio Breaker. Absolutely outstanding. Like, I still use a lot of that stuff as reference, and pretty much what you say I can take to the bank. And I think pretty much anyone else, even if you just have like sort of a middling interest in the draft, I think pretty much anything that you say, you can back up, and you can pretty much take it as well gospel, quite frankly.
I really appreciate that. That warms my heart to hear.
All right. Well, thank you so much, JC. And here's hoping for a great draft night on Tuesday.
Fingers crossed.
Well, just as I said at the beginning of the right before we had the interview, yeah, JC brought it. He 100%. Really did, man. I learned, as I said, I'm not a big guy on the draft, but I learned quite a bit. And, you you did pretty well yourself, too.
Well, that's it. I mean, I get it. I get not everybody appreciates the draft for what it is. But, I mean, if you think of it strictly as looking to where the future of your football franchise is going, then that's why it behooves you to at least pay a little bit of attention to where it's going. So, I mean, JC realizes that, and he, dropped a lot of knowledge that, there's some stuff that I was pretty much on board with, and then he dropped a few things that made me think a little bit twice now too. So now, I mean, folks, quite frankly, I am stoked for the draft tomorrow. Like I said, I got a horrible feeling of how it's going to go in some respects, but I'm really curious to see what Montreal does if they do kind of decide to throw everybody for a loop and not go all Quebec-born players. But yeah. I still can't help but think that they'll do it if only just to troll everybody. And listen, if you end up getting there's still, don't get me wrong, you probably could do an entire draft class again of all Quebec-born players, and they're all they would all be very good players, but I personally just want to see just a little bit of variety. I don't know. There's a lot of players I look at, I'm like, oh gosh, can we just like invent some sort of like, grandparent in Quebec or something like that just to justify it, anything, but well, I guess we'll see.
Yeah, well, here's the question I want to ask you. What are you more hyped for, or potential drama hype for? The regular draft, the territorial picks, or the supplemental draft?
Wow. Well, Montreal doesn't get a territorial pick, so it's a little hard to get excited about.
No, but the stuff that we heard from JC after the fact, oh boy.
Yeah. No, I think the global draft is going to be interesting because, once again, Montreal has the first overall pick. So, I mean,
who would have thought 2 first-round draft picks this year?
Dude, I mean, this is outstanding. I don't know. Like I said, I'm really excited.
Needed.
No. I mean, the past is the past, and now we're looking forward, and that's the important thing.
That's right. Exactly.
So the question you really have to ask is it noon yet? Because that's exactly when the global draft is going to be on Tuesday.
Yeah.
At noon. So I say, is it noon yet?
Hashtag is it noon yet? Yippee. Yeah, so it should be fun. As I said, I'm not, same thing. By the way, just people should know this already, but I'm going to mention it again. I'm not a big guy on the NFL draft either. So it's, it is what it is. But still, you're looking to see who your team picks up. I just couldn't name, I'm not like Cliff who can name these guys off, or JC. Wow, the work that he does. I'm just blown away. I really, really am. Mm-hmm. Just blown away by it. But yeah, either way, it should be fun. It should be fun to see what's going to happen tomorrow. Just to remind everybody, besides on Twitter, there are other places you can find us on social media. One of the best places is to find out all of the historical archive for the Alouettes Flightdeck podcast by heading over to alouettesflightdeck.ca. Don't forget, also, we have us on Instagram. That's Alouettes Flightdeck. Facebook, that's Alouettes Flightdeck Pod. YouTube. Currently, you still have to search for us at Alouettes Flightdeck, but with a little bit of promo that we did over this past week, we were getting closer and closer. I think we're within 20. I actually think we're within 20.
So it means we're 20 subscribers away from giving away that awesome satin jacket.
Yeah, we are 21 lucky subscribers away. Dedicated subscribers away who want some free swag.
Oh, there you go. I mean, listen, folks, I'll keep telling you till I'm blue in the face. Like, you got to head on over. You got to find the Alouettes Flightdeck on YouTube. You got to hit that subscribe button. Because, again,
that's all you got to do.
That's all it's going to take for you to possibly win the beautiful satin retro jacket. Brand spanking new with tags.
I know, man.
I mean, you're not getting some hand-me-downs here. You're getting a brand new jacket.
That's right. We want you to rep.
Gorgeous.
We want you to rep it with us while we're in stadium.
100%. And if you're not in the Montreal area, we still want you to be a part of this. Like, that's what it's all about. I mean, folks, I'm telling you right now. Like, tell your friends, tell your coworkers, tell your family, tell anybody who will listen that they got to get on and subscribe to the Alouettes Flightdeck. Come on.
Exactly.
I mean, and already, like, we've got some ideas in mind that we want to do. Yes, I know right now, maybe listening to a podcast on YouTube isn't exactly the most interesting thing, but we've got ideas. We've got irons in the fire that we want to get going with. And it'll be a hell of a lot easier if people can find us by going to youtube.com/Alouettes Flightdeck. That's the hope. That's the plan.
And the news that I told Cliff today, if this thing goes through, oh boy.
I mean, we want to increase that video presence. I mean, I've said I've got a face for podcasting, but still, we want to get out there. We want to provide video content in addition to our audio content. So we need your help, folks. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. But dude, you may face for podcast. The thing is, for you to be open enough to show your naked chest over a year span, for on your fight against the poundage that you were able to take off, you're good. You're good, buddy.
I'm just saying,
And I didn't know you did that, by the way. So congrats on you, man. Congrats. I'm sure it wasn't easy.
Oh my gosh. I mean, that was that. And again, I was motivated. I was inspired, and there was a goal in mind for that. Yeah. And I'm 10 years later, I'm still like, wow, this was such a journey, and it's incredible. So, I mean, I appreciate the kind comments and everything like that. But I mean, that's really what it comes down to, is just, you got to do the work. And that's what we want to do for you folks too, is we want to do the work and provide amazing content. But
exactly. Also, we were talking about before, speaking of merch, we have some new items, some new lines available currently at our merch store. That's at teespring.com/stores/Al's Flight Deck. It is the Loge Retro line and the Champs Patch 70 line. That one being an homage and not really an homage. I guess it's a recreation of the patch, the 1970 Grey Cup Champions patch that the Alouettes wore in 1971.
Mm-hmm.
And then our other one, the Loge Retro line. I love that one. That one's pretty sweet too. But yeah, head over there, and for the time being, you get 10% off with the code LAUNCH22, and that's through the 8th of May. So if you're listening to this through the 8th of May, you get 10% off on the entire store just by using the code LAUNCH22.
It's not just t-shirts. We've got hoodies. We've got coffee mugs. We've got pillows. We've got masks, even if you still want to make sure you're staying safe, even though mask mandates are probably going to be going away pretty soon.
Mm-hmm.
As far as trying to just stay fashionable and stay safe, as far as I'm concerned, there's no better way to do that than with an Alouettes Flightdeck mask. But I mean, take a look at the store, folks. I mean, I like to think there's something for everybody, man, woman, and child. So check it out.
And if there's
you got the promo code,
and if there's not, let us know, and we'll see if we can get it there.
Absolutely.
So
we appreciate each and everybody's support. People that have purchased from the past, and if you're just looking to get some new swag, tell you what, we would appreciate immensely if you decide to go that way. And if you order now, I can't promise it'll get here by training camp, but if it does, how cool would that be to go to training camp and see Alouettes Flightdeck merch on other people besides you and me?
Exactly. For sure, man. Lastly, before we head off, because as I said, it was a slow week. I did reach out, by the way, Cliff, to the boutique because, as everybody knows, the Alouettes launched or unveiled their new helmets last week. And we're seeing if they currently had an ETA on when these new potential mini helmets would be available in boutique. At the moment, they are currently on order, but there is no ETA yet on when they will be available. So it looks like you won't be able to have one before training camp. But I would imagine that getting closer to the beginning of the regular season, or within the first couple of weeks of the regular season, they will be available for you to purchase. So,
I mean, I know the boutique's supposed to be getting a whole bunch of new Alouettes merchandise as well, which would be awesome. Make sure you give those guys support as well. And let's say if you're into mini helmets, by all means. I think it'll be a lot easier to produce than what the previous helmet design was. So, I get the logistics were a little bit difficult in the past, but I imagine now it would have to be a lot easier. So, I mean, if you're one of those types that like to collect the mini helmets of all the CFL teams, make sure you add the Alouettes one to your collection now.
Exactly.
Listen, love it or hate it, it's here now. So, I mean, you may as well embrace it, enjoy it. Drink it in, folks. Exactly.
So we will be back next week at our regular time. So expect us the normal taping on Wednesday. So expect the show to be either on Wednesday or Thursday of next week. And we're hoping to have another guest with us next week, leading up to the beginning of training camp. Wow.
It's coming up so quickly. I love it.
I do too. Hey, Go.
And to all the youngsters out there that are listening that are draft eligible, best of luck. May the odds be ever in your favor. and if you're not drafted, don't stop working because. All right. Well,
you said it.
I did.
You did. Come on, you can't tell me we weren't gonna get that reference with you saying that. Come on, come on.
I suppose I set it up. I
was surprised you said it. I don't think that's what you were trying to say, but I think it worked out perfectly.
So yes, if you're draft eligible and you're not drafted, do not worry because undrafted free agency does exist in the Canadian Football League as well. You may still get that training camp invite. Don't stop working.
Exactly. Agree with you, sir. I agree with you. So, we'll speak to you guys next week. Any comments, questions, concerns, please reach out to us on social media. But for everybody here at the Alouettes Flight Deck, for Cliffy D, I'm Tim Capper. Run Final Approach.